Samson was not an ordinary man. From the day he was born, he was marked by God for a purpose greater than himself. His mother, once barren, received a promise from an angel. Her son would be a Nazirite, set apart from birth, never to drink wine, never to cut his hair, never to touch what was unclean. His destiny? To begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines, their cruel oppressors. And so Samson grew not only in strength, but in the power of the Lord. But strength can be both a blessing and a curse. For Samson, it became the stage of his downfall. From his youth, his appetite for women led him into dangerous territory. He loved Philistine women, the very people God had called him to fight. His heart burned with desire, even when his mission required discipline. First, he sought to marry a Philistine woman from Timnah, despite his parents' warnings. That marriage ended in tragedy and bloodshed, setting off a chain of violence that only escalated with time. Samson's temper, fueled by pride, turned personal conflict into national battles. He killed 30 men just to pay a riddle's wager. Later, when betrayed, he caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together with torches, and burned Philistine fields in rage. He struck down thousands with nothing but the jawbone of a donkey. Everywhere he went, the Philistines trembled. He was unstoppable, or so it seemed. But Samson had one weakness that overpowered even his unmatched strength: women who spoke to his heart. Enter Delilah. She was beautiful, cunning, and dangerous, not because of her looks, but because of her loyalty to the Philistines. They saw in Samson's obsession with her their perfect weapon. With silver in her hands, she began her mission to uncover the secret of his strength. It began innocently enough. "Tell me, Samson," she whispered as they lay together, "where does your great strength come from? How can you be bound and subdued?" Samson, playful at first, treated her questioning like a game. He gave her false answers: 7 bowstrings, new ropes, weaving his hair into a loom. Each time, Delilah tested his words, and each time Samson easily broke free. Yet each failure revealed something more dangerous. Samson's heart was entangled, blinded by his desire for her. Night after night, Delilah pressed harder. She nagged, she wept, she accused him of not truly loving her. Samson, the strongest man in Israel, could slay lions with his bare hands and topple armies, but he could not resist the persistence of one woman. Finally exhausted and desperate for peace, Samson revealed the truth that sealed his fate. "No razor has ever touched my head," he confessed. "If my hair is cut, my strength will leave me, and I will become like any other man." It was not the hair itself that made him strong, but what it symbolized: the covenant of the Nazirite vow, his consecration to God. By giving up his secret to Delilah, Samson did more than reveal a weakness. He treated God's calling as a game, trading his destiny for the comfort of a lover's lap. Delilah wasted no time. While Samson slept on her knees, she called for a man to shave the 7 locks of his hair. His head was shorn, his vow broken, his strength gone. When the Philistines rushed in, Samson awoke and thought, "I will shake myself free as before." But this time, he did not realize that the Lord had departed from him. The mighty warrior, who once tore apart lions, now fell like a lamb before his enemies. They seized him, gouged out his eyes, and shackled him with bronze chains. The Philistines dragged him down to Gaza, the very city whose gates he had once carried on his shoulders, and threw him into prison. There, the strongest judge of Israel became a grinder of grain, blind, broken, and humiliated. The story should have ended there, with Samson as a tragic warning about wasted potential and reckless desire. But God was not finished yet. Even in the ashes of Samson's failure, a spark of purpose remained. For as his enemies celebrated his downfall, something quiet, almost invisible, began to happen. The hair on Samson's head started to grow again. The once mighty Samson now stumbled through the streets of Gaza, no longer a feared warrior, but a broken man in chains. His eyes, gouged out by Philistine soldiers, left him in darkness. The man who once saw the enemy coming from miles away could no longer see his own hands. The people who once trembled at his roar now laughed and spat in his face. Children mocked him, women jeered. Warriors who had once fled from him now dragged him like an ox to the grinding mill. There, day after day, Samson pushed a heavy stone to crush grain into flour. It was the work of slaves, the work of animals, The man who had slain lions and toppled armies was reduced to blind labor. Every turn of the grinding wheel was a reminder of his fall from judge of Israel to prisoner of his enemies. But in the quiet of prison, Samson had something he never had during his days of power: time to think. Without the roar of battle, without the seduction of women, without the cheers of victory, he was left alone with the silence of his own heart. And in that silence, perhaps for the first time, Samson realized what his strength had truly meant. It had never belonged to him. It was not his glory, not his gift to spend recklessly. It had always been the Lord's. Outside the prison walls, the Philistines celebrated. News of Samson's capture spread like wildfire across their cities. For years he had humiliated them, killed their warriors, burned their fields, and shattered their pride. But now Israel's great champion was blind, chained, and powerless. Soon the Philistine leaders began to plan a feast to honor their god, Dagon, the fish god of their people. They would gather thousands of nobles, rulers, and citizens into the great temple of Gaza. There they would offer sacrifices, sing songs, and mock Samson as proof that their god was greater than the God of Israel. The day of the festival came. The temple was massive, supported by towering pillars of stone and wood. Crowds flooded the structure, filling the seats, the balcony, the rooftop, every space jammed with voices shouting praise to Dagon. "Our God has delivered Samson into our hands," they cried. Laughter and mockery shook the hall. At the height of the celebration, the rulers gave a command: "Bring out Samson, that we may be entertained." And so the blind man was led into the temple, stumbling forward with the help of a young boy who held his hand. Once again, the mighty judge of Israel became a spectacle. The people roared with laughter as they watched him stumble, as they hurled insults, as they remembered his past victories, only to see him humiliated before their God. "Dance for us, Samson," they shouted. "Where is your strength now?" Others mocked. "Is this the man who killed 1,000 with the jawbone of a donkey?" The jeers pierced deeper than the loss of his sight. For Samson, this was not just mockery, it was the shame of betraying his God, his people, and his calling. His strength had been meant for deliverance, but he had squandered it for his own desires, and now his failure was on public display. Yet while the crowd laughed, something was stirring in Samson's heart. His humiliation had stripped him of pride. His blindness had forced him to see what he never saw before. Without God he was nothing. And in that moment Samson began to pray, not the boastful cries of a warrior demanding victory, but the humble prayer of a broken man seeking redemption. "Lord God," he whispered beneath the roar of the crowd, "remember me, strengthen me, just once more." As the mockery continued, Samson turned to the boy who guided him. "Place me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple," he said softly. The child, unaware of what Samson planned, led him to the two great central pillars. Samson leaned against them, his hands stretching out to touch the massive supports of stone and wood. The crowd continued to cheer, oblivious to what was happening. The rulers of the Philistines, the lords of Gaza, the great men of their nation, all of them sat watching, laughing, and reveling in their triumph. The air was thick with arrogance, pride, and the smell of sacrifice to their God. Samson, blind and broken, stood between the pillars, his arms stretched wide, his body trembling with weakness. Yet in that weakness, he found something he had lost long ago: total dependence on the Lord. The stage was set, the crowd was ready, the temple thundered with laughter, and in the middle of it all, Israel's strongest judge prepared for his final stand. The temple of Dagon trembled with laughter and celebration. Thousands of Philistines crowded the hall, their voices rising in chants of victory. On the balcony sat the rulers, the lords who commanded armies, the leaders who had long oppressed Israel. The people rejoiced not only in Samson's humiliation, but in what it represented. To them, Dagon had triumphed over the God of Israel. But there, in the center of it all, stood Samson, blind, weak, scarred, and mocked. His hands rested on the great pillars that held up the entire structure. He looked nothing like the warrior who once tore lions apart and scattered armies. To the crowd, he was a joke, but to God, he was a man broken enough to be used again. Samson drew in a deep breath. His heart pounded. He whispered one last prayer, short and desperate, yet filled with faith. "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, that I may with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." The crowd was too loud to hear his words, but heaven heard. Samson's muscles tensed. The hair on his head, once the symbol of his vow, had begun to grow back. But this time, his strength would not be for personal pride or reckless anger. This final act would be for God's glory and for Israel's deliverance. With arms stretched wide across the two pillars, Samson braced himself. His body shook with effort. Slowly, painfully, he pushed. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The crowd only laughed harder. "Look at him, the blind fool thinks he's still strong." But then a low groan echoed through the stones. The pillars trembled. Dust began to fall from the ceiling. The laughter turned to confusion. The mocking turned to screams. Samson roared with all his strength. His blind eyes faced upward, as though looking to the God he had once forgotten. The pillars cracked. The beams above snapped. And suddenly the entire temple, the pride of the Philistines, the house of their God, the place filled with thousands of men and women, began to collapse. The crowd screamed in terror as the roof gave way. Stone and wood came crashing down. Nobles, rulers, warriors, common people, all were buried in an avalanche of destruction. The lords of the Philistines, the very leaders who had orchestrated Samson's downfall, were crushed beneath the ruins. And there, in the center, beneath the falling weight of the temple, Samson fell with them, his arms still stretched wide, his body broken, his life spent. The Bible records the chilling truth. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. It was a shocking, violent end for Israel's strongest judge. Samson's life had been marked by passion, pride, and failure. But in his death, he fulfilled the purpose God had given him from birth, to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines. His final act turned humiliation into victory, weakness into strength, death into triumph. For the Israelites, the news of Samson's last stand spread quickly. Though their judge had fallen, his sacrifice struck a devastating blow against their oppressors. The Philistines' confidence was shattered, their leaders dead, their God humiliated. And Israel, once again reminded of the power of the Lord, mourned but also honored the man who gave his life for their freedom. His family came and retrieved his body from the rubble, laying him to rest in the tomb of his father, Manoah. Samson's story is both inspiring and sobering. It reminds us that no matter how gifted, no matter how strong, no human can fulfill their calling apart from God. Samson's strength was legendary, yet it was his pride and lust that led to his downfall. Still, in his darkest hour, when he was blind, broken, and seemingly useless, God heard his prayer and used him one last time. His death foreshadows another story centuries later, a man nailed to a cross, arms stretched wide, mocked by enemies, appearing weak and defeated. But through that death came the greatest victory of all time. Samson's collapse pointed to Christ's sacrifice, where weakness turned to eternal strength, and death became the pathway to life. Samson's last stand was not just the shocking end of a man. It was a declaration that God's purposes cannot be defeated, even by human failure. Strength is fleeting, beauty fades, pride destroys. But when a person surrenders fully to God, even in their final moments, their life can echo with eternal meaning. So when we remember Samson, we remember not just his strength, but his weakness, not just his victories, but his failures. And most of all, we remember his final prayer, "Lord, remember me," because in the end, that is the cry of every human heart.